Welcome to Quilts and Lace Serger Class number 3. In this class we will cover several 2-thread techniques as well as some 4-thread techniques that we didn't have time to do on number 1 class, so some of the specialty ones. The Serger models that really this class is applicable would be those machines that we have automatic thread delivery system, meaning no tension dials, and then also they have the either air-jet threading or the extraordinary threading. So the current line, that would mean Triumph, Accolade, Acclaim, and Victory. On the current line, one of the Sergers that is displayed on this picture is the Celebrate. Some of these techniques would be applicable for it. However, the settings are quite a bit different since we have the tension dials on this machine. So that's why it's not very good class to follow for this one. So we mainly concentrate on the machines that we don't have any tension dials. Other models that this would be applicable would be from the previous line, the Ovation, Evolution, Enlighten, and Imagine, as well as even older ones, Evolve, Evolve Wave, Imagine Wave. So all of these would be applicable. On this class, I will be using a lot of different feet. I love all the different feet because they make my techniques to go much easier. And here's the image of some of the ones I'll be using. I'll actually will be using most of those ones. And I'll have some decorative threads on my machine when I do some of the stitching because these threads just makes these Serger stitches so pretty. So let's get started. On this slide, I have put images of 2 of the models from the page on the quick reference guides that have information about the 2-thread stitching. So on the left side, I have the Triumph and right side Imagine. Really, any of the machines with the automatic thread delivery, these images are very similar. So this class will apply for all. But I've often used these 2 machines because that way I can cover pretty much the both ends of the spectrum. And on this Triumph page, there's also one big picture that I kind of left out from my red line. That is a 3-thread flatlock. So we do have a 3-thread flatlock stitch available on all the machines. And on the number 2 class, the very last exercise, I had a little demonstration on how that stitch will work. All the same techniques that I can do a 3-thread flatlock narrow, I can do them on a 2-thread flatlock narrow as well. I'll have a little image showing where I use 3-thread instead of the 2-thread. But because we can do the similar techniques on the 2-thread, I really concentrate on those ones on this class. So we have 4 different ones on the 2-thread. We have the 2-thread flatlock wide, 2-thread flatlock narrow, blanket stitch, and then we also have a ladder stitch. So we will start with the flatlock wide. And here's the close-up on those images from those 2 different machines. As always, we go through the checklist first and then the threading. And I highlighted certain things on this one. So on the 2-thread flatlock wide stitch, again, no matter what machine we use, we will be using the O1 or the left needle, which is the same one really on the overlock side, the most left needle in the machine. Stitch length, and again, we get the range. Different machines just give us a different range, but we can always use the entire width, entire scale on this one. They just give us the most popular range on these images. Stitch width, they put the widest one, which I'll be using this widest one quite a bit, so we have a wider stitch. But as always, we can change the width narrower if we don't want to have as a wide seam. Because that's the cool thing about the automatic thread delivery is that I can change those settings and my machine will take care of the tensions or delivering on the threads. But then the important one is the stitch selector. No matter which one of these we have, we need to put it to A. Then if you have a machine with a wave stitch, then that wave selector needs to be at the overlock side. Again, we haven't used that one yet, but towards the end of this class, we will do doing the wave as well. But just again, as a reminder that going through this checklist will help because you may have moved the machine and accidentally flipped one of those levers to another position. So that makes us go through all the ones. Again, the 8-thread searchers, the chain and looper tensions, that doesn't matter where they are. We're not going to be using those on this stitch. And then again, 8-thread searchers, that's again only 8-thread searchers. We have the upper looper selector. So every time, anytime when we have thread in the upper or lower looper on my overlock side of the machine, we need to have this upper looper selector up. Otherwise, there'll be no stitch. Then I put a big X on this one. On this quick reference guide, this is the first time I've been telling that don't use what it tells you. And I explained on my first exercise why I put X on this one. Because on this one they tell to lock the knife, but I need to have the knife operating on this time on my first exercise, so I will leave it unlocked. And then again, the knife cover on 8-thread searchers, we need to have that in place. So anytime we do overlock, we need to have that one. But then I put the box around subsidiary looper, and then I put another box around on this imagine image that shows kind of a little bit hidden this one. This is very, very important. Very often I get a phone call in a shop and someone said that, oh, I haven't done the flatlock stitch for a while and I'm trying to do a stitching and there's no stitch. I normally ask, did you engage the subsidiary looper? And then usually I just hear, thank you. As a reminder, we need to engage the subsidiary looper. That's why it's again important to go through the checklist first. What that means, the subsidiary looper, on the upper looper, we have a little extra piece on it. When all these other stitches that we've been doing, it's been kind of sitting on the side. Well, now we need to flip it over. And depending on the machines, some of the newer ones, the shape of it was changed. So on these ones, we just pull it towards right, flip it over, and then it will, the little finger goes into the eye of the looper. On some of the older ones, it looks like almost like a safety pin in their little spring. So we will just flip it over and then push that little finger into the eye of the looper. They both work the same as a function. It's just how they get engaged will be a little bit different. Again, the best is to look onto the manual that they show exactly on each model how that works. So that is very important. Well, then now that we've gone through the checklist, now we can do threading. And here's another place that I put an arrow, because the important thing again on this automatic thread delivery ones is that we will thread it how the chart shows. So the lower looper goes in the space like normal, but the needle thread, instead of going on to that first slot that we would use it if it was a normal overlock stitch, we will put it onto the third slot. And the reason for that one is that on this stitch, we need to have the same amount of looper thread as we have needle thread. And the way to do that one is we use the delivery for the upper looper. So we put it on that slot and then we will thread it like normal up to the eye of the needle. Just remember, always put it over the take up lever. So it is the same in all these models. So it always, the needle thread goes on this stitch on the third slot. And that's the reason why in the factory they didn't put those markings in here, the upper looper, lower looper, because the threads don't always go in those spots. Just a little bit general information about the flatlock stitches. These can be used as a construction seam or as a decorative seam. So on this image, what I have on the right side, I have some examples on both ways. The crazy patch all the way on the right, that one is sort of a combination because it is a pretty construction seam. The crazy patch in a sewing machine, we normally would sew the seams and decorate them afterwards. When we do it in a serger and put the heavy decorative thread in a lower looper, that way I will get these decorations done at the same time. And also my knife is cutting all those excess pieces, so no trimming. So really quick way to make a crazy patch. So on this, the crazy patch, I had used the 2-thread flatlock stitch, which means that the white thread, the heavier thread, was in the lower looper, and the needle I used only serger thread. This little black and white and gray pouch, this one I had used on these seams, the 3-thread flatlock stitch. When you look these two stitches, doesn't look that much of a difference. The only difference is that on the 3-thread flatlock, the looper thread, the upper looper, is the one that it shows mostly. if I put my wrong size of fabric together. In this case, I had put the heavier thread in the upper loop. In the 2-thread, it goes in the lower loop. And then on the 3-thread techniques, the lower loop ends up being just a straight line on one side of the stitching, and the nil thread is in a straight line on the other side. So I would have to look very closely to see the difference between those two stitches. And that's one reason why most times I end up using the 2-thread flatlock, because I only had to thread 2 pieces then. The little pink heart, that was one of our Serger Club projects. This one, the pink fabric, is a solid piece. It's not in pieces. And I just folded fabric, put a little decorative embroidery thread in the lower looper, and then attached the lace at the same time. Just created the fabric this way, and then finally made it into a little pouch. So again, as a reminder, we can also weave ribbons onto those stitches afterwards. And then really important things when we thread the machine and set the machine for this stitch is that we will only thread the needle and the lower looper. And then really important is look on that quick reference chart or the manual where the needle threads will go, because it's not going in the same spot as we would think, as we would use on when we do it as a normal overlock stitch. And the other important thing on the 2-thread stitching is that we need to engage the subsidiary looper. If it's not engaged, there is no stitch. And then, as a reminder, you use heavier threads, start about 2 mm stitch length and go down. So if you start at very short stitch length, it might jam the machine. And then for the stitch selector, on this wider stitching, it needs to be at A.
On this one, I'll be using a lot of different specialty feet. So I lined up some of my favorite, what I'm going to be using on this one. And there are a few samples in the back that I've been using the flatlock stitch and some of the other techniques in this class. I also will be using some decorative threads, so I'll be talking about those as we go along. The first stitch that I will be using is the 2-thread flatlock wide. And in our quick reference guide, we have a 3-thread flatlock narrow, and then we have a 2-thread flatlock wide narrow, and then some other 2-thread techniques. So what's the difference between a 2 and 3-thread flatlocks? Well, on a 3-thread, we'll be using a needle, upper looper, and a lower looper. And the thread that shows the most on one side of the stitch would be the upper looper. On this one, I had used a 3-thread flatlock. And this one I had heavier thread in the upper looper. On this case, the lower looper and the nil threads will be sewn in little straight lines. Well, I had matching Serger thread on those, so really wouldn't make much difference. You just mainly see the upper looper thread. Well, this stitch really has 2 right sides. I can use the nil side, or I can use the looper side. And this is the side that looks like how the looper side would be. And this is the side of the needle side. On the needle side, I can weave some ribbons to decorate it even more, which I've done on this little pillow. This little block on part of the pillow. So here are some ribbons that have been woven, some wider ribbons, some of the ones I have a couple different ribbons. So this stitch, we have 2 right sides, the needle thread or the looper thread side. So how do we go by threading? Again, the important thing is always to go through our checklist first. And I'll be doing the 2-thread flatlock wide. So I will need to have the needle 01, which is the left needle. Again, the length and width kind of depends on what we want to do with that stitch. I'm going to put my length about maybe 2.5, 3, because I have a little bit heavier thread in my lower looper. And then the width, I'm going to make it as wide as possible, so I put it at the 7.5. The stitch selector needs to be at A for this stitch. And then the rest of the settings are pretty much similar what we have had on some of the other overlock, but again, good thing to go through, because in case if I move the machine or did something else between, I may have moved my wave selector position to make sure that it is still an overlock position. And then those 2 on the 8-thread sergers don't matter. Then again, this is only an 8-thread serger that our upper looper selector lever is up. Here's something that I will not now this time believe on this one. Depending on what I do with this technique, I could lock the knife But in this case, I do want to have the knife cutting. So I will have my knife unlocked. And when I show the sample, maybe explains why I want to do that one. So this is the one of the ones that I actually don't believe what it says. And then on again 8-thread sergers, we need to have the knife cover. But here is the very, very, very important thing. It says subsidiary looper. So in this case, because we don't put any thread in the upper looper, I need to engage my subsidiary looper. And where is that on my machine? Let me open the doors. On the upper looper, let me get that thread out the way. On upper looper, there's a little piece that has been attached. Some of the ones, it has even a little, look like a little spring loaded on the top, or look like a safety pin almost. The spring on this model is further in the back. So there are a couple different models. So again, best to check the operations manual to see which way to engage it. On mine, which is really on some of the newer machines, I will pull it back, rotate it, and this little pin that goes to the eye of the upper looper. And to disengage, I will pull it to left, rotate back, and put it back on this place. So the rule is, this is my rule anyway, if I have thread in the upper looper, then I can't have this one. If there's no thread in the upper looper, I have to have it. Because if I start now stitching, I have threaded my lower looper and a needle, but I have no thread in the upper looper. There will be no stitch. What this little guy does is, this subsidiary looper, he carries the thread from the lower looper on the top side. So it kind of lifts it over. So in this case, I will pull it back, rotate, and snap it onto this hole. So depending again on the machine, some of the ones you kind of flip it over and kind of pull it back to catch it. So just to kind of add a little bit different how these subsidiary loopers were done during the years. But again, I don't want to have it there when I have thread. So you can have either or, but not both. So that was my little rule anyway. And then as for the threading, the lower looper in any of the overlock stitches always goes in the same spot. It goes under this most right slot on the thread delivery system. Then that's the thread that will show. So I have put a little bit heavier dark green thread on my sample, so it hopefully shows well in the camera. But then the needle thread, and here's the important part, so that the needle thread is threaded where the picture shows. Again, we go through the checklist first, and then we go through the threading. So there's nothing on the first two, which are on normal overlock stitches, we would have the needle threads. This time the needle thread goes all the way to the third, where we would put usually the upper looper thread. The reason for that one is that because we do not have any tensions, it's a thread delivery. So it gives us the right amount of thread, and doesn't matter what kind of thread it is, thick or thin. And in order to get same amount of thread for the upper and lower looper, we'll just use the upper looper area for threading. It's really clever how they done it. But then from here, it just goes to the needle like normal over the take-up lever and through the eye of the needle. So I will just to get my samples ready, and then I'll show what we can do with this stitch. Just had to show this little sample. It's a wine bottle bag, a little gift bag, done with the crazy pads. We can do a crazy pads easily in a sewing machine, where we normally would be just putting right sides together, sew the seam, and then decorate those seams afterwards. Well, the cool thing in the Serger is that we can do pretty crazy pads already all at one step in the machine. And no extra trimming, because the knife will trim all those excess pieces. So in this case, I had used the heavier thread in the lower looper, normal thread in my left needle. And then I just put wrong sides of fabric together. So starting on the seam, I sewed this one, then I put my next one, and just kept going around, adding pieces. And eventually I had a piece that was big enough to make into a bag. And finally on a back seam, I used the Serger for that one, a Flatlock seam as well. So cool thing on this bag was that when I was finished, I didn't even have to turn it right side out. It only was right side out. And make in a bottom seam and the gussets the same way. Those are all Flatlock stitches as a construction seam. So, and even put the inserted the ribbon at the time of stitching, so I didn't even have to put the ribbon afterwards. So and then I just put a lining on it so you don't really see too much of seams inside. But that was just a really quick using some of the scraps and make a little gift bag.
Okay, for the first sample, I'm just going to sew 2 pieces of fabric together, and I'm going to do it 2 ways. The first one what I will be doing, I will place my 2 pieces of fabric right sides together. That way, on my right side, I will get my needle threads, which I have started to weave some ribbons on that needle thread stitching. And my ribbon weaver, what I like to use, is part of this bodkin set. I use this other one, the blunt kind of more needle looking kind of tool for weaving usually the thread tails. I show that on number 1 class. I use that one to secure the ends of the seams. But this flat one is just really perfect one to weave ribbons because it will keep the ribbon flat. And then it just has a little blunt toe, it's very easy to go through. So my favorite tool. Well then, on the second sample, what I'll be doing is I'll take the next 2 pieces of fabric, but I'll put wrong sides together because this stitch we have 2 right sides, either the needle side or the looper side. And I put a little bit heavier thread in the looper, so I see really nice coverage on very decorative stitching. And this is the reason why I wanted to have the knife cutting. Most instructions tell you just to not to even go close to the knife on this one, so that the raw edges will be meeting right in the middle. On one of the classes I had taken years ago, I was told this by the educator, and I kind of like this way how she was teaching me. That you want to have on the, these light to medium weight fabrics, little woven fabrics, you want to have a little fold, meaning that when I put my 2 pieces of fabrics together, I am cutting a little bit off the edge, and when I pull them flat together, one of those layers will make a little fold, and that is just making that stitch a lot more secure, especially if you have a bit loosely woven fabric. So works great on the light to medium weight fabrics. I'll show later on how to do it on a bulky fabric. As for foot, standard foot will work fine. Clear foot is a great one, and open toe, of course. So no specialty needed on this one, and I think I was using on my sample the standard. So I'll show this demonstration when I show those 2 pieces.
So I have set my machine all ready to go, and I have the standard foot in my machine. I could also use the open toe foot or the clear foot. Any of these ones would work. And I have 2 pieces of just quilting weight cotton, and I put these right sides together. This is the reason why I want to have my knife cutting, is that I'm going to cut a piece out of it. There are many ways that describe how to do the stitching with the flatlock stitch when we are joining 2 pieces of fabric together. Several ones tell you not to even cut anything off, and that's why the manual shows you not to engage that knife. But in my opinion, if I have a woven fabric, and if I just have those 2 edges kind of kissing each other inside this narrow seam, it's not gonna be very strong seam. So I like to have on these light to medium weight fabrics on this stitch, the fabric to make a little fold inside. It's a much stronger and a more prettier seam, I think, on my opinion. Again, multiple ways to do things, so that's just the way I like to do it. So I'm gonna stitch just a normal way. So I have the heavy thread in a lower looper. I have at the moment while I design a 6, which is a thread no longer is available. Fairly similar thread is the Pearl Crown Rayon, or I could use some of the other ones. Glamo, I have it on a couple different weights, and then I have some of the Decoras on a couple different weights. Then Candlelight, all kinds of different threads in the upper looper thread. In this case, when I'm sewing it right sides together, I'm kind of wasting the pretty thread because you wouldn't see it. This time you would see the needle threads. Can I put heavier thread in a needle? Yep, you can put a 12 weight cotton, and I'll show later sample that I used even Pearl Crown Rayon, which the manual tells not to put it in the needle, but if you have a larger eye needle, like a top stitch needle, size 90-14, you can put it in the needle as well. So let me show this seam, and I will just trim off a little bit. that. There we go. So how this stitch looks like on the right side, even though this thread, this looper thread was in my lower looper, it was brought up on the top side. So it actually looks like it was in the upper looper, even though it was in the lower looper. Needle side shows on the underside, and those are just the meeting at the edge. The only two threads. Well, why it is called a flat lock? Because it at the moment doesn't look anything like a flat lock. Well, it's still an overlock stitch, so I had to sew it over the edge, and then I will pull it flat. So here we go. So now it is flat lock, and it looks like I sewn it in the middle of the fabric. If I put my right sides together, I will see my needle thread, which in this case doesn't look that pretty because I just ordinary Serger thread in the needle, and my pretty thread was on a looper, which ended up in the wrong side. So that is why, if you wanted to have your looper threads to show, you need to put your wrong sides of fabrics together. So let me do a sample that way. Again, the seam looks the same, and I pull it flat. Now my pretty side of the thread is on the right side. Well, if I had just put ordinary Serger thread in the lower looper, and this was my right side, well, I can always weave yarns or ribbons on it. And some of my favorite tools are these bodkins, the bodkin set. I had shown earlier in the #1 class that I used this smaller one for threading the Serger tail inside the stitching, because it is a very blunt toe in here. It doesn't catch the other threads or the seam and the fabric. It just goes between the layers. I actually have a couple. They only come with two. It's just I got few of the ones, and I lost one of these. But this other one is great for weaving ribbons because it will keep the ribbon flat. And this way I can just do either over everyone, or I can skip a few, and I can pull my ribbon through, and it just keeps my ribbon nicely flat. So that I love using this one for threading the any of the ribbons into the stitching. So that was our flat lock on a medium to lightweight fabrics. And let me show a little sample where I have used it. On this little cover, this like little Serger cover, the 3 rows of flat lock stitching. The most outer ones is using the needle side as my right side, and the middle one uses the looper. I use different threads. On these most outer ones, I put pearl crown rayon to my needle. And normally pearl crown rayon is not put in the needles, it's quite heavy, but I lengthened the stitch length about 3 or 4 on this one, and then also used a large size 9014 top stitch needle. The one in the center is ribbon floss, and I don't know if some of these are still available this way, but it is a flat thread. It was designed for decorative things like putting in a bobbin work, or you can also put it in the loopers. So this one, you see, that one is it's a really kind of a funny looking thread. It is a ribbon, but it's thin enough and slippery enough that you can put it in the loopers. In that case, I had put it's a little glittery ribbon floss. I put that in a lower looper, and then put my wrong sides of the fabrics together to sew that seam.
For my sample number 2, I'm gonna be sewing on 2 pieces of fleece. And this is very bulky fabric. But the nice thing about fleece is that it doesn't fray. So I don't need to have that little extra fold out what I had for security on my woven fabrics. So on this one, all I want to have is those 2 fabric edges to meet in the middle underneath that seam. So this is what I'm gonna do, how the instructions normally show how to do this stitching. So in this case, I will be guiding my fabric so that that edge, when those 2 edges are put together, that edge is about halfway between the left needle and the edge of the knife blade. Well, how do I get it there? I could use my standard foot or clear foot or open toe foot and just to eyeball it, which I've done sometimes in the past, but there are lots of other feet that really make it so much easier. I like to use a foot that has a guide. So the best results you'll get using either the blind hem foot or lace applicator foot. And in this case, these really bulky ones, I tend to like personally the blind hem foot a bit better. And blind hem foot is obviously designed to do a blind hem, which we'll be doing later this class. But in this time, I'm going to have the blind hem just to use because it has a nice guide on it. And I will move that guide on a position that when I put my raw edges of the fabrics right next to it, my edge will be then halfway between the needle and the knife. And then I will just search the seam, and when I pull this open, these edges should just kiss right in each other inside the seam. And then I'll show a little picture of a little paper blanket that I done this way. I used little scraps, sewed these pieces together, and on the needle side I wove some yarn, so some knitting yarn to cover that side. On my looper side I had put heavier thread. So then I will do a live demonstration on this one.
What about sewing fleece pieces together? This little baby blanket was one of our Serger projects for Serger Club classes one time. And I had used as the scraps of little fleece squares, joined them together with the Flatlock stitch. And I had put the heavy thread in a lower looper, and upper looper I used normal thread, which on some of the seams I then wove just the knitting yarns to cover those. Some of the ones I did not, so you can see the difference on those ones. So on this one, because fleece doesn't ravel, we don't need to trim excess off, and actually don't want to trim the excess off, because on that case the seam would become very bulky. So when I sew the fleece together, I really don't want to make that little fold like I want it on my thin fabrics, on my woven fabrics. This time I'd like those edges just to kind of kiss each other inside the seam. Well, how do I do that one? Well, it's the same stitch. All I had to do is to guide the fabric different. And this is why often on those instructions they tell you to lock the knife, because we're not going anywhere near the knife. I can lock it or leave it up. It's not going to matter because, again, I'm not even going close to it. So this time, again, I'm still going to put my fabrics together. It's not going to be a stitch on flat. Flat lock means it's still an overlock stitch, so we had to go over the edge. If I put this way and unlock my knife, I'm going to jam my machine because the looper still would have to go over that edge. So that's why we always have to keep an edge for the overlock stitch. Well, this time I'm going to stitch it so that half of my stitches will be going on the fabric and half of them will be hanging off the edge. And when I pull those pieces flat, I will have those edges kissing each other right in the middle. You're going to see that these two pieces on this one. If I guide it too far towards left, I'll have a gap. I don't really want to have a gap there either. And I don't want to have a big bulk of the fabric, no fold either. Just kissing those edges together. Well, how do I guide it? I could use my standard foot, because the clear foot will give me a little bit extra visibility, the same as open toe. But some of the other feet that are really, really helpful for all this kind of stitching is either the lace applicator foot or the blind hem foot. Kind of sounds a bit odd. Why would I want to use some of these ones? Well, these feet have guides, and these guides are really helpful on aligning, because when I get my things lined, I just guide it right against the guide. This one is really bulky fabric, so if you have really, really bulky, maybe I didn't have enough space on that one, but this is one of my favorites for several techniques. I'm going to use that foot on one of the later ones. I'm going to use this time. Really, either one should work, but I'm going to just use different ones for different techniques on this time. This blind hem foot, we have a guide, and eventually we will do blind hem also with the blind hem foot, but this time I'm going to use it just because the guide. And there's a screw that I can adjust because I can't move my needle. Like in my sewing machine, I can shift the stitch a little bit left to right on a blind hem. But in a Serger, I can't do that because the needle's always go in the same spot. But I can move my fabric and my guide. So again, best thing always is to take a little piece of scrap from your fabric, do a test, make sure everything is lined up before going on the actual project. So let me change onto that one, and then I will show how to sew this. I put my foot on, and I'm using this large screwdriver that came with the machine. That's really the only reason I have it, other than changing the blades on the knife if I need to. But this one is great for adjusting the screw. So I have loosened it, and when I loosen that one, I can move my guide a little bit left to right. So I'm going to put it quite a bit towards the right this time. I'll do a little test to see how that would work. So when I'm guiding my fabric, I'm just, because I'm not trimming anything off, I can go all the way to the needles. That way I can get pretty good starting point on this one. And then again, my knife is still engaged. I could lock it, doesn't really matter. I'm not going anywhere near it. So this time all I'm doing is I'm just guiding the fabric, looking the guide. I'm not watching the needle, I just look the guide. So my stitching looks a bit funny because half of it is kind of outside of my fabric edge. But when I pull it flat, now look at that. I think I was pretty good. Kind of after using some of these feet a bit, you get the feel on just to putting them in. So those edges are just kind of kissing inside the seam. So it's very flat seam, even though I have the bulky fabric. So same stitch, it's just how we guide things on the machine is different.
For sample number 3, I will demonstrate how to use the Flatlock stitches as a decorative seam. On these pieces, what I have shown in a picture, these fabrics, they have not been cut. It's not a construction seam. This is still one solid piece, and it looks like the stitching is right in the middle of it. Lots of times I get a question, people ask me, did I just unlock the knife and start stitching the middle? I said, no, I can't do that with the overlock machine. Overlock, we need to have an over the edge because the loopers go over the edge. So in this case, I folded the fabric together to create a fold and stitch on the fold and then pulled it flat. Again, as a reminder, this stitch has two right sides. So on the green sample and a beige sample, on those ones, I had put pretty decorative thread in a lower looper. And then I folded my fabric wrong sides together. That way, when I pull it flat, my pretty thread is going to be on the right side. On this little pouch, I have used the needle threads to be my right side. So in this case, I folded the fabric right sides together and then pulled it flat, and I wove some ribbons between those needle threads. So again, as a reminder, on the settings, we really are using the same settings, and I was using the widest stitch width. We can always change it narrower or wider if needed, and then the stitch length depends on how close I want to have the stitches to go, and also depending on the thickness of the thread. Just a reminder, if you have really thick thread, do not start it very short stitch length because it will just jam. And then stitch selector is still at A. As for foot, you could use a standard foot, clear foot, open toe foot, but I find on this technique that if I have some kind of a guide, it makes it a whole lot easier to guide it. So I could use either the blind hem foot because it has a guide, or the lace applicator foot. So on the sample, when I demonstrate to sew this beige piece of fabric, I will be using the lace applicator foot and then show how I create this stitching.
For my next technique is to use this Flatlock stitch just as a decorative. The previous ones were more construction seam, even though they were pretty construction seams. But this time, this piece of fabric is not being cut. It's still one single piece of fabric. And all I've done on this one is to sew the Flatlock stitch in the middle of it. Again, lots of times people, when they see this sample, they ask me that, oh, did I just lock the knife and went ahead? I said, no, if I locked my knife, I jam my machine. It's an overlock stitch. I had to give an edge, which meant I folded it in half. And because I was using this heavy thread in my looper, I folded it wrong sides together. Again, this stitch has two right sides. On this pillow, I had folded right sides together, and then I see the needle threads so that I was able to weave some ribbons on. And there's actually a couple ribbons on some of these seams. So that depending on, again, what I want to have on this seam to look, I can use either the right side or the wrong side of the stitch. So because I still have that heavy thread on my looper, I'm going to fold this fabric wrong sides together. And I just do a little finger press on this one. And I will be guiding this the same way as I was guiding that bulky fabric, meaning I want half of this stitch to be hanging over the edge. So half the fold is kind of halfway inside the seam. My needles go there and my knife edge would be there. That's one reason I often leave the knife up, even if I'm not cutting anything, because I can use it as a guide, especially if I'll be using just a standard foot or the open toe foot. That guide will work pretty good. Then I could use my blind hem foot the same way. Probably I would need to adjust the guide a little bit because the fabric is a different weight. But this is another option. I can use my lace applicator foot. And on this one, let's snap that one. It has a movable guide as well. Let's get that little Serger tail out of the way. There we go. So in this case, I normally just again have my presser foot up. I will slide my fabric on top of that guide under the foot, and I will put it against the needle. And when I lower my presser foot, on that case I can kind of see is half of my fabric, the fold of the fabric kind of halfway inside the seam or not. And also this one has the little notches. So my needle that I'm using is that second notch from the right. So this one, there's a little line. If I have that little line pretty close to where my first notch is, that gives me quite good stitching. So let me show this way. I think I may have used this last time, so this might be pretty well set up already. And I did not change any settings on my machine. I could have made my seam a bit narrower if I wanted by just moving the knife position, but I wanted to have this case the widest possible. Again, half of my stitches are hanging off the edge. That is what I want, so there's enough space for that the other piece of fabric to fill the gap. So I will pull it flat, and looks like I guided it pretty good, so I should just show this part. Look, it's perfect. But again, partly in this one, I think I was guiding a little bit too hard against the blade on my guide. I'm sitting a little bit on the side when I do the taping, so sometimes hard to see, so at least that's my excuse today. But I have a little bleed on this one. Well, this is a lightweight fabric. I would maybe just say, oh, that'll be fine because I have heavy thread and it covers it. But ideally, this is really what I would want to have, how I guide it on towards the end of it. So I would most likely do another, again, if this was a real life, I would, this was my test. So I will move my guide a little bit more towards to the needle, which way towards the left. That way I would have a better stitching like I had towards the end of it.
Well, what else can we do with this stitch? Just another decorative option. Well, in this time, I have now sewn some ribbons inside of the looper threads. I mentioned earlier, and if I go back to the previous one, I can always weave ribbons inside the needle threads especially. Or I could weave it inside on the looper threads, but it's a little bit harder to sometimes to weave the ribbon afterwards. But on these samples, the green piece on the left top left, and then on this base, on these ones, that piece of ribbon was sewn at the same time. Well, it doesn't have to be ribbon, it could be also sequin. So I will be showing those samples and actually how I do this one. One other kind of option to make it decorative is to attach a lace, which is really simple because in that case, the lace is just put on the top of the fold of the fabric and stitched pretty much the same way as the previous sample, which was this one in here. So lace is just kind of an extra piece, we don't even know it's there. So I'll be demonstrating those two pieces of the fabric in the class.
Well, could I put a ribbon at the same time into my seam? Of course, I could always weave the ribbon afterwards, and that was I would definitely have to do if I used it on a needle thread side. But if I wanted to put it on my looper sides, I could weave it after, but I can also sew it at the same time. Well, this time I could kind of, I think, well, could I just use this foot that has a guide? Only problem with this foot is that this guide would keep it a little bit too far towards left and my needle will catch it. I really don't want to catch it this time. So I'm not going to use the standard foot for that one, even though that would be tempting. Of course, kind of would think, well, could I use some of these other feet? Well, I actually find that some of these ones are not the best ones for this technique. The best ones would be, well, I like using the open toe or the clear foot, or I could use the standard foot, but not just weaving through those holes. So let me put the clear foot in my machine. And this time, because I'd like to put this ribbon right in the middle, well, I need to fold the fabric wrong sides together. And it is important to fold it in the wrong sides together because the looper threads will be going on the top side, and that is where the ribbon is gonna go also. So I will do a little finger press. If this was a real project, I would iron it, or really cool tools are these fabric folding pens. All I have to do is run a little bead with this one, and then just to finger press it, have a little crease. Well, this time I want to guide this ribbon so that it'll be just half of that ribbon will be covering the edge of the fabric. And then when I pull it flat, it will cover the rest. This is a 1/4 inch wide ribbon, so I need to make sure my stitch width is the widest possible. I also have a really thick thread in a looper. So if I have a short stitch length, like I'm being using about 2.5 on these earlier samples, that one just will cover all my ribbon, and I kind of wasted my ribbon. So I'm gonna lengthen the stitch length all the way to 4 with this heavier thread. So this time I want to have my ribbon to go there, but I don't want my knife to cut. So this is the time that I do lock the knife. I don't want to have it cut because this is just that wide. So this is there's a couple ways. I would just put this right there and guide it this way. But I find that if I put my fabric underneath the foot first, and that is where I like using the clear foot because I have all those guides. And again, I'm going to have my needle to go halfway over the edge, which is my second notch is going there. The first notch is kind of almost my guide. And I have those little extra stickers on my machine also to kind of give me a little extra guidance. But this time I'm going to be sneaky and I'm going to put this ribbon on top of the foot. And then I just rotate the hand wheel, sorry about my hands are going to be on the way. I'm just going to do a couple stitches to kind of anchor this in place. And then I'm going to keep my ribbon out of the way a bit. That's the reason I lock the knife. And all I'm doing is I'm guiding the fabric. If I hold tight onto this ribbon, I would either gather it, or at this time I haven't even caught the ribbon into the stitching, so I would most likely just pull it out. So just have to kind of trust that my needle is going over the left side of that ribbon. Just kind of keeping that ribbon sort of out of the way there and guiding the fabric. And it just kind of looks a bit funny, but yeah, it just kind of guides on its own pretty much there. That's the reason I locked my knife, because I didn't want the knife to go anywhere near. And that's the reason why I also lengthened my stitch length, because with that heavy thread, we barely otherwise would see those stitches. So now when I pull this flat, so here we have pretty nice flat fabric on the back side. And on the front side, we have ribbon that is attached at the same time. Well, other than ribbons, you can also attach sequin. So here I have just sewn a sequin the same way. And if I had put a monofilament thread in a looper, it will cover it pretty nicely. I had matching serger thread in the loopers and a long stitch length. So all I kind of afterwards was just to lift it, all those little sequin plates out of the way a bit to get the thread underneath. But here you can also put sequin. And you can also put lace. Well, lace is really easy because all we have to do is lay that edge of the lace over the fold, and that way it'll get attached at the same time. So this is a little Valentine Day pouch that we had done in a Serger Club a couple times. So all it is, this ribbon was laid over the edge. And here's a bit narrower ribbon. The thread I used on this case was the embroidery thread, a little bit of a shinier, just and a thinner thread because the delicate lace. So this one also, the seam is a bit narrower. Well, I used a narrow flatlock instead of wide, but I still have that heavy thread on the looper, so I'm gonna do that one. I will get a piece of lace and show how that. Well, I have a piece of lace, and a fabric that I just had a little finger crease in the middle of it. So in this time, I'm just gonna lay this header of the lace right along the edge of the fabric. So really the lace is it's just there. It doesn't give us any extra issues. It's like I was doing the sample where I had just a piece of fabric that I folded in half. So this time I'm using that lace applicator foot. Well, it's kind of sounds very appropriate this time because I'm applying lace. But the reason I like using this foot for this technique is because the guide. The other option that has a guide is the blind hem foot. And of course I could still use the clear foot and just to use that for guidance. But I just like to use different feet for different techniques. So again, I'm just gonna wash the guide. I still have that really kind of a heavy thread in my loop. There we go. Again, half of my stitches were off the edge and I still had my long stitch length from my previous sample. Again, I can have, depending on the look I want to have, and if I had a sort of stitch length, it will cover better. But now the lace was attached at the same time. And here's my seam on the back side of it. Well, this little pouch was done as one of our Serger Club projects for a while ago. And in this case, we used a flatlock stitch couple different ways. One was just to sew the fabric right sides together, so and then weave the ribbon afterwards. In this case, we put the lace and the ribbon at the same time in a looper side. And we did this in a class. We did some practice pieces first, and then I got really funny looks when I say that, okay, now we're gonna put the lace and the ribbon at the same time. Sounded really scary, but actually very simple. All we had to do was to put the lace on top of the fold, and then we wove the ribbon like in the previous sample through the top. They all went together at the same time. One of the great helpers to keep this lace in place is to glue it in place. So all I did was just on that fold of fabric, put a little bead of fabric glue, and then tack the lace down. So the lace didn't move, so it wasn't anything extra there. So it was, everyone after we did that sample on this seam, they said, that was easier than doing without it, because that little trick just helped us.
Well, there's a little bonus. This is not actually something that we are doing currently in a class, and I don't even demonstrate this one on my little live video. But I want to add this one because this is another cool technique that we can do with the Serger. And we have done some of these ones. The scarf, which is a section of a scarf that I have shown in here. This is wool fabric. And we did a class on this in a shop actually as a project class. The black and white piece is a section that was one of the earlier Serger clubs that we had done a pillow. And then we did, I think it was maybe last year, we did a little Thanksgiving project that we did couching over yarns. So this is really simple thing. So all we had to do on this one is to take some of those heavier yarns or like eyelash, and we fold the fabric together, right sides together this time. And just before we stitch, we will put this yarn inside the fold. And when we stitch it, my needle threads will catch that yarn. And when I pull it flat, it looks like the yarn is floating on top. On this black and white sample, I use white needle thread, so it shows you see the thread. But if I had used monofilament thread, you barely see. Well, that's what I had done on this scarf. I used the monofilament thread in the needle, so these yarns, that little pumpy yarn, looks exactly like it was just floating on the top of the fabric. Other stitches on this yarn is, here's my couching over the ribbon, and this time I did the same, just putting the yarn instead of ribbon. And then on this sample, I wove two ribbons, kind of alternating between those little needle threads. And these ones are just ordinary, just flatlock stitches using the looper side, the pretty thread. So this one is all done with the just using the flatlock stitches. So same stitch, but depending what side I use and what threads I used. So that was a little bonus.